the can you bought at in Salinas was 5 gallons, you would add 15 gallons of capacity of gas in those gas cans. Is that correct?
Considering the 3 gas cans, yes, correct.
Okay. We're assuming you have 3 gas cans. All right. Now, looking at the receipts we have here, again, the first in time is the 8:42 p.m. You see that on there? The time?
Yes.
Okay. 8:42 p.m. being the first in time. That's 8.3 gallons, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, and we saw this receipt here for the small quantity of gas, the 2.77 gallons, right?
Right.
All right. So, rounding off some of the numbers, we would have 2.7 gallons and 8.3 gallons, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So if we have, that makes for a total of 11 gallons. Just over 11 gallons if we carry some of the numbers, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So in order for that to go into the gas cans, you would have had to fill the gas cans and then 10 minutes later come back, put a little more into one of the cans. You didn't fill 15 gallons worth here, right?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Now, and just for the record, the comparison related to Exhibit 237013, comparing this now to 237012, and looking at the times, you had 20 military time being 20:53 and 24 seconds as to the receipt that's on your left, correct?
Correct.
And about a minute and a half later or so, you would put more gas, or you'd purchase more gas. Correct? That's the one we see on the right, looking at 20:54:52.
I can't quite see the time on the right.
Objection, lack of foundation as to put any of the gas. There's 2 times listed on each of the receipts. Foundation hasn't been established as to which one the one she used to put the gas in.
State your next question.
Ms. Arias, let me do, maybe I'll do it this way so you can see it a little better, so there's no confusion.
I apologize. I can actually see it. I was just confusing my left and right. I couldn't see the left, and I thought that was
Okay.
right. So I can see it.
We see this receipt 20:54:52, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now these receipts, these two here, the receipts that are of similar nature, now I'm going to have to zoom back out. These 2 receipts that are of a similar nature, this is also after over 10 gallons of gas, right?
Yes. In total, yes.
Yeah, so we have 2.7 gallons and we have 9.6 gallons roughly. So again, we would have this situation where if this would have gone into a gas can, the 3rd gas can, you just, for whatever reason, would have put very little in it. Right?
As in the 2 gallons? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nonsensical.
Okay. When you had filled, you mentioned a couple different occasions when you filled your car with gas. And you mentioned, I want to make sure I get it, Desert Sky?
Desert Center. I think
Desert
it's
Center.
called.
And also you mentioned filling up gas in Buckingham, right?
Yes, at the Shell.
Okay. Now, if you remember, do you remember the quantity of that gas being closer to the equivalence of these 13 gallons we see here?
It was around that, yes, each time.
So it might be a safer bet that this gas went into the car in these receipts. Is that correct?
Leading speculation, she can just tell us.
Sustained.
Do you believe then, looking at these receipts from 2053.24 and 2054.52 from the register, that those were more likely to have gone in your Ford Focus rental car?
Objection, speculation. She doesn't know.
Sustained.
Do you see it likely, to your recollection, that you would have filled up one source of gas at 8:42 p.m., put more gas in at 20:53, and bearing in mind now, Miss Arias, even if you had that third gas can, that would be a good 16 gallons worth, right?
Yes.
Over 16 gallons. So that couldn't have gone into any gas cans, even if you had this third gas can, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Okay. So, going back to my question then, do you believe that you would have filled one source, came back, and 10 minutes later thought that you could have put $40 into the gas cans after putting 8.3 gallons into them?
Objection, speculation. She can tell us what she did. She's asking her to speculate.
Sustained. Restate your question.
Having filled two, if the first one, the first receipt were to be the gas cans, and you put in $34 to fill both gas cans, would it make sense to you that you would put $40 worth of gas, try to put that into the remaining gas can?
Objection, speculation. This won't make sense.
Overruled. Any answer?
No, that makes no sense.
Bringing back, removing Exhibit 237001, and now including 237013. Does it make more sense then that you were filling the tank with these receipts?
Objection, speculation as to what makes more sense.
Overruled.
Yes, I would have prepaid for that and then topped it off.
Okay. Now, as it relates to your time in Pasadena, there was several questions about your license plate related to your time at Starbucks, in Pasadena, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And your testimony on cross seemed to be such that you came out of this Starbucks and there were some skaters rolling away or skating away when you came out of the Starbucks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And to your recollection, it's my understanding that you didn't recall the exact time of this event. Is that accurate?
No, it was dark, but I don't remember the exact time. It wasn't too late.
Okay, but the sun was down. You recall
The sun
that?
was down, yes.
Okay. And the parking lot was lit by artificial light?
Yes,
Okay. And you are parked with the front end of your car facing towards the building, from what you told us. Is that right?
no, it was pulled into the parking space facing the curb. The building would have been behind me and off to the right a little bit.
Okay. And in terms of, so when you walked out of the Starbucks, the first part of the vehicle, your rental car that you would have seen was the back end of it.
That's right.
So when you saw these skaters going away, you didn't notice anything wrong with the back part of your car, is that?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
Did you notice anything wrong with the back of your car?
No, I just noticed some people skating away from the area of my car, and I didn't think much of it at first.
Okay. Now, you told us that you got in your car and you saw your license plate. Or, well, you saw an object that later you discerned was a license plate.
Right,
correct?
as I was backing out, the headlights
Okay.
caught it.
And remind us again the position of this license plate when you saw it.
It was sort of leaning against the, whatever that thing is called, the cinder block, I
Okay.
guess. It was leaning against that.
All right.
Not tall, but like, lengthwise.
Okay. And do you remember whether it was the front of the plate or the back of the plate that you were observing?
I don't remember, but I think it was,
Objection speculation.
Sustained.
You testified on cross-examination that you saw this plate, whatever side of it was, you saw it reflecting. And it
yes.
caught your attention, right?
Yes,
Okay.
it did.
And you told us that you looked out and you saw you got out of the car, right?
That's right.
And you saw this plate, and it sounds like you logically concluded that it would be yours because of the bugs that weren't on the front end of your car, right?
Objection leading. So it's characterization logically, vouching.
Sustained.
Okay. You go out to the front of your car and you look at this object, right?
Yes.
Okay. And why would you do that? Why would you get out?
Well, because it flashed and I just had that instinct for a second. I thought, well, what is that? Because it made a bright flash when my headlights caught it. So I got out to find out what it was.
Okay. And did you examine the object to discern what it was?
Yes, I could see it was a regular modern California license plate.
Okay. And what led you to believe or to conclude that the license plate that you observed laying against this cinder block was the license plate that was related to your rental car?
Well, I picked it up and I noticed on the front there were a bunch of dead bugs stuck all over it, and I glanced at my car. It didn't have a license plate. It had also dead bugs all over the bumper, except in the rectangular area where there should be a license plate. So I just kind of looked at it, looked at my car, put two and two together, realized what might have happened, and then I just wanted to get back in my car very quickly.
Okay. You mentioned that you were, you said you wanted to get back in your car quickly. Sounds like you were uneasy or uncomfortable at that point in time from what you told us on cross?
Yes, after I perceived that someone had messed with my car, I wanted to get back in the car and lock the doors.
Now you later learned when you were in Utah that, well, let me ask you this. This license plate, the way it was leaned up against this cinder block, did it look to you like it had been intentionally laid there?
Objection, lack of foundation. How would she know the intent of the people that moved it?
I asked her how it
Overruled.
looked.
Overruled, you may answer.
Yes, it looked like it was placed against the cinder block.
And you later learned that your rear license plate had been turned upside down when you were pulled over in Utah, correct?
That's correct.
So could it have been the case that somebody was in the process of flipping your front license plate around when you saw it?
That was my thought.
Objection, speculation.
Okay, so you place a license plate in your car and you proceed on your trip, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
I put it on the floorboard.
On the floorboard.
Yeah, it was kind of
Okay.
dirty with a bunch of bugs on it.
All right. Now you mentioned on your trip that you stopped in, we mentioned this a bit earlier as well, you stopped to get gas at 2 different locations on the way in, correct?
Do you mean from Pasadena?
From Pasadena to Mesa, you stop and buy gas twice.
That's correct.
Okay. And your recollection is that you paid cash for that gas, correct?
That's my well, I think I paid cash. I'm not really sure. I just know I went and got gas there and paid for it and got back on the road.
Now, as it relates to gas and the purchase of gas and filling up with gas, you had talked to us about how one of the reasons that you wanted the gas cans was to save money on gas. Do you remember telling us that?
Yes, that's why I originally wanted the gas cans from Daryl to borrow them.
Instead of filling up your car with the gas cans on the way into Mesa, you are telling us that you chose to fill up the tank from a pump instead of those cans.
Yes.
Okay.
First at Desert Center, and then that would be Buckeye.
Okay. Why did you choose then to retain the gas that was in your gas cans?
Well, when I got to Pasadena and I realized I wasn't going to hook up with Laura, which was Daryl's sister, and I wasn't going south to San Diego to visit John Dixon, that was out. I was going to get on the road and head on I-15 and go to Utah. I'd never driven I-15. I'd never driven across Nevada. I understand that it goes maybe through the southern part of the state. It's desert. I mean, I don't know what's out there. I mean, I was concerned about driving across that area in the middle of the night, being alone, never having driven that road before. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't run out of gas. So I put gas up first in my tanks so that I didn't run out of gas in the middle of nowhere. That was my fear.
Okay. So it wasn't just about saving money, it was about concern about running out of gas on the way to Utah.
Yeah, I was hoping to save money, but I was more concerned for my safety once I realized I was driving 12 hours to somewhere I'd never driven before.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you about arriving at Travis's house and some of the things that happened on June 4th as to what you can recall, okay?
Okay.
In that regard, when you spoke to Mr. Martinez, during several points, not just, but mostly as it related to June 4th, you had brought up that you have memory issues that affect you during stressful times. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And you mentioned specifically when men are yelling at you.
Objection mischaracterizes your testimony.
Was that your testimony?
Grilled.
I said screaming or grilling.
Okay. All right. So screaming or grilling was your words. I just want to make sure we get it right.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in this regard, with this response, before we get into it a little further, you're not a psychologist, are you?
No, I'm not.
You're not a psychiatrist, are you?
No.
You have no training in assessing memory loss?
No.
No training in assessing post-traumatic stress disorder?
No.
No training in assessing the psychological effects that can befall a battered woman?
No.
What I think you can tell us about is you and your reaction. So I want to focus on that.
I object to the characterization of what I think, irrelevant, what he thinks.
Sustained.
Jodi, even without this training, you can tell us things about this reaction, can't you?
The reaction on June 4th?
Not the reaction on June 4th, but this general reaction to men yelling at you, stress, grilling you. I'll use your words.
Yes.
Okay.
And I should be clear, it's not just men. It's not limited men. It's primarily, but it could be my mom. It could be any female as well. Just somebody yelling.
Okay. Let's talk about, if you can recall for us, this condition, if you will, for lack of a better word, when you remember this condition beginning, when are your first memories of you realizing, geez, when this happens, I just lose focus of what's going on.
Again, mischaracterization. She has memory issues, not losing focus.
Sustained.
Do you remember things better when you are able to focus on what you're doing?
Yes.
When people yell at you or you're in stressful situations, do you lose focus on what's going on?
I do.
Okay. When do you remember this condition or beginning to have this response to this sort of stimulus, the yelling, the anger?
I remember it really began when I was around 14, I think. Not as prolific as when I was with Travis ultimately, but my parents would yell at me over things, and it sort of increased. Then I moved away for a while and spent about 10 years away from that environment, and it got a little bit better. There was one point when Daryl yelled at me one time in our entire relationship, and I almost had a nervous breakdown. It was pretty intense. And then, aside from those things, after getting together with Travis, it took several months, probably 6 months, but he began to snap and yell. And like I said yesterday, I think it was, he would just chuck me.
She was asked when it started.
Sustained.
Okay. It started when you were about 14. It sounds like it wasn't a big issue for you again until your relationship with Mr. Alexander. Is that accurate?
Sustained.
This condition, did it begin to come into play again once your relationship with Travis Alexander began.
Yes, it did.
Okay. Now, in that regard, do you remember the first instance where this condition came into effect?
During my relationship with
Yeah,
Travis?
with Travis.
Well, on the road, when we were on the way to the Getty Center,
Objection, speculation. If she doesn't remember, how could she relate something she doesn't remember?
She was answering the question, Judge. She didn't say she didn't remember.
Question.
Your relationship with Mr. Alexander. He yelled at you, right?
yes,
And did that give rise to this flustered condition?
yes, and eventually the shaking and all that.
Okay. Do you remember, what is your first memory of this happening with Mr. Alexander?
The shaking didn't really start till the fall, 2007.
Objection, non-responsive. She was being asked if she remembers about not remembering.
Overruled.
But as far as getting flustered, it was when the first, I'd seen him angry before with Abe and all those things, but he really flipped out when he was driving my car, and so I just hunkered down, hoping we could hurry up and get there so we could end that hell ride, basically.
And was this, we talked this morning about the instance where you were stuck in traffic and he was beating on your car. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes,
Okay. That was the first incident you remember. Were there other incidents you remember?
yes.
And in that regard, what was the next time you remember?
The
having
next time I think he flipped out on me was mid-August.
In August of 2007?
Jack, this is the characterization. Is she flipping out? Is she answering the question of when she had the reaction, or when, according to her, Mr. Alexander got upset?
Right, sustained.
August of 2007, you told us about Mr. Alexander beating his head against the walls of his home. Do you recall telling us that?
Yes,
Did you have this reaction at that point in time?
Objection, like the foundation downstairs or upstairs?
Overruled.
yes.
At this point in time, August of 2007, we heard the testimony that Mr. Alexander had not yet been violent with you, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you've just told us about having this flustered reaction to these events when there was contact, when he was making contact with an object. Would mere yelling trigger this for you with Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I didn't want him to be angry.
Okay. So, if he would call you, when he called you a whore and a slut and yelled at you, would you have this reaction?
Objection, like the foundation. When he allegedly called her this.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of your objection.
Like a foundation, when did he allegedly call her this?
Overruled, you may answer.
Yeah, it occurred during those times.
And when he yelled at you about not having enough money to loan him, or John Dixon, did this also occur?
Objection, comment on question.
Sustained.
Okay. Let's talk about this Havasupai trip and this backpack. You've told us that when you were behind closed doors in the bedroom in Mr. Freeman's home, Mr. Alexander was yelling at you about your interaction, the time you spent with John Dixon in Irvine, California, right?
Yes, but to be clear, it was in Travis's home, not Dan's.
Okay. And is this the incident when he was referring to Mr. Dixon as Mr. Dickhead?
Yes, John Dickett.
And when he's yelling at you and saying, you shouldn't be hanging out with John Dickhead, did you have this reaction?
Yes, it was very stressful. I was crying and well, I was,
Objection. She's already answered the question.
Apart from losing your memory and being foggy, what else did you experience?
Objection, lack of foundation. She said she loses her memory. She didn't say being foggy at that point.
Sustained.
What else happened apart from this condition with your memory and your response? Were you shaking when he was yelling at you about John Dickhead?
I was shaking and crying, yes. I was trying to brush my teeth.
Objection. She's already answered the question.
Sustained.
Okay. Can you think of any other times when Mr. Alexander yelled at you and you became disoriented to the point of causing memory loss?
Yes, and to be clear, foggy falls under that. I mean,
Objection. She's not answering the question.
Overruled. The answer will stand.
Okay.
they're not complete blackouts. So, I mean, things just get scrambled. I don't know how else. There would be the time when we were arguing in his bedroom and he didn't let me leave the first few times, and then eventually I left. I think he yelled at me one more time. There was another time in August when he was in Utah, and that was over the phone. I mean, there were several times.
Well, you could even have this reaction over the phone with him.
Yes,
Distance was immaterial to your reaction,
Objection leading.
correct?
Sustained.
Would distance matter to you in terms of this reaction?
it didn't matter.
When you had this reaction, were you able to rationalize and say, hey, Mr. Alexander's X amount of miles away, I don't have to worry about it? Could you make that rationalization?
No, my rationalization was he's
Objection.
come,
She's answered the question.
Overruled.
that he's X amount of miles away, and that didn't matter because he was coming back anyway.
Okay. So, as far as this reaction goes, how is it different, if at all, before you met Travis Alexander and after you met Travis Alexander?
There was no shaking, just maybe a little disorientation. I just remember when my dad would get in my face, similar things would happen with Travis. Like one time he was screaming at me and some of his spit got on me, and I went to wipe it off, and he took offense to that in a bad way.
Was that Travis or your dad?
My dad.
Okay.
And, I mean, sometimes Mom screams and I don't know, I don't like to listen to it, so.
Okay. Now, as it relates to June 4th, one of the things that you were asked about is the correlation, if you will, between August 2007 and June of 2008 in terms of your placement or your choice, the choices that you made as far as what you chose to do is running away as opposed to fighting for your life. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, between August 7th, or August of 2007 and June of 2008, there were some violent incidents, weren't there?
Yes, there were.
between August of '07 and June of 2008, what was the first incident of violence?
Well, I didn't consider when he pushed me down twice violent.
Okay, but that was the first incident, right?
I guess I would classify it as I understand it now, yes.
Okay. That occurred, if I recall, in his bedroom. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was a situation where you couldn't get away from him in the bedroom, right?
Objection made.
You were in the bedroom. Could you get away?
No, not at first.
You couldn't run away from him?
Well, the first two times I tried, he stopped me.
Caught you, right?
Yes.
The reaction that we've talked about, you talked about the yelling and things like that. During this occasion, do you remember experiencing the fear and the shaking and the symptoms that you talked about earlier?
When was that? I'm sorry.
When you were thrown down in his bedroom and not allowed to leave?
Yes.
After that incident, when was the next incident of violence?
It would have been when he broke my finger on the 22nd of January.
Okay. And that incident, where did that happen?
That was just at the end of at the end of his bed on the carpet.
In the bedroom, right?
Yes.
And you couldn't get away, could you?
Objection made.
Could you get away?
I didn't attempt to get up. I was trying to deflect his kicks. I guess the answer would be no at first.
You didn't even try to get away because you didn't feel like you could. Is that what you're telling us? I could have finished my question, Judge.
Finish your question.
Is that what you're telling us, that you didn't feel like you had much chance of getting away?
Objection made.
Overruled.
I was more concerned with deflecting his foot because he kicked my ribs and it really hurt. So my thought wasn't, I guess in the back of my mind, of course I wanted to get away, but the immediate threat was his foot.
And when you're on the ground and he's kicking you, are you having the same reaction that we've been talking about here this afternoon? The shaking, the fogginess.
Yes.
The third instance of violence, where did that take place?
That one was in the car on the freeway.
Okay. And how about the last instance of violence? Was that June 4th?
No, that would have been right before I moved when he choked me until I lost consciousness.
And where did he choke you where you lost all consciousness?
We were near his dresser in the bedroom.
Again, in the bedroom. Behind these closed, locked doors that we saw earlier in this testimony, right? Earlier in this case.
Objection made.
Overruled.
Yes, the doors were closed.
So you had sex behind closed doors and he beat you behind closed doors. Is that correct?
Objection made.
Overruled.
Well, when I think of beating, I think of fists. He never hit me with his fists, but yeah, that's where the violence occurred, and the one time in the car.
Okay. The instance where he was choking you in the bedroom near his dresser. Did you feel like you could get away, just get up and run down the stairs?
No, definitely not then, because he was straddling me and all his weight was on me and his hands were around my neck.
In that episode, did you attempt to get away?
At first I thought of clawing at his face, but then I couldn't do that. It didn't feel right to gouge his eyes out or something. I didn't have a lot of thought. I didn't have a lot of time to think because my arms got very heavy and I just remember them falling and then passing out.
When you were there, on your back, in his bedroom, being choked, did you consider the possibility that you were going to die that day?
I don't think I considered it afterward, but I didn't have enough time to think. I just remember everything going black. I couldn't breathe. That's what it was.
So in all these incidents of violence, and I know you may not characterize it that way, but you never considered running away an option, right?
Objection made.
Did you consider running away during any of these incidents to be a viable option?
Not as the incidents were going down, not during that period. No.
Okay. Now, another thing you were asked about as it relates to what happened on June 4th is the fact that Mr. Alexander was in shape. Do you recall being asked that?
Yes.
But was he a sprinter or a marathon runner?
I know he liked to walk on the treadmill, but I'm not sure about marathons and things.
Did you run? Did you jog?
No, actually I didn't. I was very active in my job, but not running.
Now, on June 4th, 2008, you had posed for some pictures for Mr. Alexander. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And we talked earlier in the testimony about how you did certain things and you said certain things. I believe this came up yesterday because Travis wanted them and you enjoyed pleasing him, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to show you, direct your attention to Exhibit 164. And I'm going to attempt just to try to highlight as to your face. Can you see your face there?
Yes.
Were you having some kind of independent fun there? Because you kind of look not so happy.
Objection, Council.
Abstain.
You happy there?
I was uncomfortable.
And why were you posing for that picture?
Well, it's something he'd been wanting to do for a long time. He had the new camera, he was excited about it. It was closed doors, it was private, and he said we could delete them.
Now this photograph that we just saw, the headshot of 164, was this before or after you were tied up?
I think it was after.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure of the sequence of events, but I want to say it was after.
Okay. Now this rope that you were tied up with, I think you made the assessment that it was about 20 feet long, right?
Yeah, I don't know exact feet. I just know the length from this place to this place, like the bathroom to the bedroom. It was
Okay.
pretty long.
And you do not know, or do you know, the width of Mr. Alexander's headboard?
No, it was a king-size bed, but I don't know what the width is.
Do you know the amount of rope that it took? Well, let me back up a second. You described your wrist being bound in a noose-like manner. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know how many inches or feet of rope it took in order to have your these nooses around your hands?
No, I let Travis handle that.
Okay. All right. These nooses that were around your hand, can you recall for us, were they wrapped several times, just once? Do you know?
Objection, this case, that's what she previously said, wrists.
I said her wrists.
Overall.
I don't remember how he made the knots, but I remember just being able to slip my hands in and out. Not like really loose, but they weren't tight.
Okay. They weren't tight around your wrists, right?
Yeah.
When you say tight, that's what you mean.
Overruled.
Yeah, it wasn't cutting off the blood flow or anything.
Can you recall if it was tight as it related to the bed?
I recall it being taut, like when I couldn't really move my arms a whole lot. I could only bring them a certain distance this way because it was tight, the rope was.
Okay. And your wrists, they would have been, from what you told us earlier, they would have been at the very corners of the bed. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Were they still on the bed or were they off the bed? Your hands?
While they were tied up,
Yes.
they were on the bed in
Okay.
the corners.
All right. In the very corners, but there wasn't a lot of wiggle room back and forth, right?
Objection,
Was there a lot of wiggle room back and forth?
I would say no.
Okay.
It was tight.
All right. In terms of your wrists as well, were they very close to the headboard or were they several inches back on the bed?
I don't recall. I mean, my head wasn't hitting the headboard. I don't recall my arms were stretched
Okay. Once you got your wrists out of those nooses, do you recall the rope being still on the bed?
No, I'd have no, I don't think it was.
Okay. What, after you were loose from this rope, did you move around on the bed when you were posing for these pictures? How did that work?
Yes, after that first, I'm trying to remember this sequence of pictures. I think Travis started off on the side of the bed, standing next to the bed, and he took a picture of me, and then he climbed onto the bed and took more pictures.
Okay. So once the rope got off your wrist, you have no idea where it went. Is that what you told us on cross?
Objection, reading.
Overruled. The answer yes to that.
I can't remember if he took the rope or if he just,
Okay.
Do you remember what happened with the rope?
no. Well, not, ultimately, I threw it in a dumpster, but I don't remember at that point where the rope was. I mean, that part we used. The rest of it was just on the floor.
Now, one thing we saw in the pictures from that day, apart from everything else, we saw that there was a bottle of KY lubricant on the bed. Do you recall seeing those?
Yes.
And I kind of neglected earlier, there were some comments on your direct examination about, and through the tape, snippets of the tape were played, the recording from May 10th, that you introduced Mr. Alexander to KY. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is it true that you did indeed, in fact, introduce him to KY?
Yes, that's true.
Why did you introduce KY into the relationship?
Objection, Rollins.
Overruled. You may continue.
Ms. Arias, the question before you was why you chose to introduce Mr. Alexander to KY.
Well, there were several reasons. The main reason being that some of the activities that he wanted to do were painful without it, and he was not willing to go to the store and buy it. So, like, I had said before, after he ran out of Astroglide, he never went back to the store.
The scope of the question, why, not whether or not she went to the store.
Sustained.
Okay. Well, let's break that down a little bit, Jodi. You said some of the activities that he wanted to engage in were painful if it were not for KY. What are those activities?
Sex.
Are we talking vaginal sex or are we talking anal sex? Or oral sex?
Anal.
Anal sex. Okay. And from what you've told us before in your sex life, anal sex was not a passion of yours. Is that correct?
It had never been a regular part of my thing with people that I've been intimate with.
But you had said in other parts of your testimony, it came through this idea that Travis was very persuasive, right? You heard that?
Yes, that was true.
So it stands to reason then that if Travis wanted to have anal sex with you, he's probably going to get to do so, right?
Objection, speculation, or characterization of the evidence without changing.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Well, let's back up. You recall telling us about the incident after you were baptized and Mr. Alexander had anal sex with you when you weren't expecting that to take place?
Yes.
You didn't protest that?
Only after it began.
Objection, the question is, did she protest that?
Overall.
I did after it was underway for a few seconds.
And there were other occasions when you had anal sex with Mr. Alexander, correct?
Yes.
And you introduced him to the KY to reduce the pain of those encounters, correct?
That was one of the reasons.
You weren't willing instead to say no to those encounters.
I couldn't imagine saying no.
Objection. She was asked whether or not she could say no to those encounters.
Sustained.
Why not?
During a lot of that time, I was in love with Travis, and I probably would have done that anytime that he wanted to.
Okay. When you were in love with him, would it be fair to say that he had an all access pass to your body?
Yes.
Now you said, in terms of introducing him to KY, that you said that Mr. Alexander was not willing to buy it himself. Recall telling us that a few moments ago?
Yes.
And without telling us what he said, what was your understanding of the reasons why he wasn't willing to make that purchase himself?
Objection beyond scope of cause.
Approach, please.
why were you the one who purchased the KY jelly that you and Mr. Alexander were choosing to use?
Travis did not want to be seen buying that. He knew a lot of people in East Mesa and a lot of people from his church.
Did you purchase this KY at his request?
Jackson has an answer. She indicated that. Her answer stands.
Roll, Jimmy, answer.
I don't recall him making a specific request for me to go out and buy it. Well, when it was discussed that we would buy it, he refused, so I did. But I don't recall him saying, please go out and do it. I just know that he wouldn't.
Did you have a desire to purchase it to avoid the pain?
Objection, lady. Overruled.
Certainly, that was one of the reasons I bought it.
Okay. Judge, could we take the break a few minutes early?
Yes, we'll take the afternoon recess at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, please be back in the jury room at 10 minutes after 3. Please remember the admonition. You are excused. The record will show the jury has left the courtroom. Ms. Arias, you may step down. Did you need a bench conference? No.
No, Your Honor, just a few minutes.
Judge, we'll be back, what, at 10 after, I think you said?
10 after, yes.
Thank you.
We are in recess.